Perfect. And I'm just going to wait for the stream itself to catch up. Let's just give it a second.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, the stream is caught up. So yeah, this particular stream, we're gonna delve a little bit deeper again into Mormonism. But again, like these are more so kind of open discussions between Daniel and I, and also other groups, other religious groups. So we obviously will at times go on. I don't want to say tangents, but we will detour to other things that as well are relative or relevant rather. So yeah, just for those who don't know, I'm joined by Daniel today. Daniel is obviously a recurring guest on this channel. Daniel also has his own YouTube channel called The Jesus Conversation. He also has a website as well called ChristAwakening.com. I recommend that all you guys who are watching and see this, check out his content. Daniel has fantastic content on just essentially anything Bible related, apologetics, just in terms of the resources that he has for building your faith, all that kind of stuff. I highly recommend you check out his channel. And as always, it's a pleasure to have you, Daniel. Welcome to the stream. You're muted.
Yeah, the pleasure is mine. Thanks for the invitation, Adam.
Perfect. So today's stream, Daniel, like we've done a couple of streams in the past, a little bit on Mormonism. Mm-hmm. So we're just gonna build on that a little bit. I want to see. There's a particular video I'd like us to watch, because it's relevant to this particular topic. Because I think, to be honest with you, I think the issue with the Book of Abraham, along with other stuff, right, is certainly one of the issues that's I think it's the hardest to defend from kind of a Mormon perspective. Like mm-hmm. Mormons are generally laughed at within scholarship from a religious standpoint, as in their religion really has no credibility from a religious standpoint for a number of reasons. And we've kind of explored these in the past. One of them being that the fact that their religion was so, it came along so later, right? Like it's not like the Bible, which is a genuine ancient record. Yes. No scholar would call the Book of Mormon an ancient record. Okay, mm-hmm. No credible scholar is going to say that. From their perspective, it's the invention of Joseph Smith. Okay, right. This 19th century self-professing prophet. The Mormon has to prove that Joseph Smith is a prophet and that the Book of Mormon is a genuine ancient record, and then they have to explain why no credible scholar agrees with that consensus. Mm-hmm. Right? Why is the consensus within scholarship that it's a fraudulent text? One prime proof of that is the Book of Abraham, right? Which again, within scholarship, it's unanimously agreed is nothing more than a forgery. Okay, like it's a mistranslation, right? It's like he did it purposely. He mistranslated a text on purpose, which he couldn't translate. And the reason we know this is because once the Rosetta Stone was discovered and translators were able to translate these ancient Egyptian languages, they then were able to translate the what's called the papyrus that Joseph Smith claimed translated. And then they found out that his translation was bogus. Okay, that's how translation works. It's very straightforward, Daniel. Like, there's like if you think of what's your other language, Daniel?
I speak Hindi and Telugu.
So if we go with Hindi, right? What's the Hindi for how are you?
Aap kaise ho?
So if you say that, right, to any person who understands Hindi, they will all understand it as how are you, right?
Exactly, yeah.
It doesn't mean anything other than how are you. And like this is kind of, I tried to demonstrate this point before. That's how translation works. Yeah. Like it's very, very straightforward. If we have a phrase, right, where we know the core meaning of what that sentence is saying, based on the syntax, based on the verbs, the nouns, all that stuff, prepositions, everything. If it's this and only this. Like if I say how are you, I just mean how are you. I don't mean anything else by it. It's straightforward. But the thing with Joseph Smith's translation of this particular papyrus is that when he translated it as something completely different from what everyone else translated it as. So for example, that phrase that you gave me, Daniel, how are you in Hindi? If I told you, no, Daniel, it doesn't mean that in Hindi. It means my dog went to the shop. What would you then say?
Yeah, I'd say you don't know the language.
Exactly, right. And this is the argument and they don't seem to get it, right? This is the argument that scholarship has also presented against the Book of Abraham, which is a clear proof that Joseph Smith was a fraud, right? Because if he was an authentic prophet, he would have been able to translate this, and his translation would have been identical to the later translations, which later translators could only do after the Rosetta Stone was discovered. That would have been an example of prophethood, because he would have had knowledge or a capacity to do something that no one else could do, right? It would have been a demonstration that this was something outside of human capacity. But what ends up happening, he falsely translates the text, which is a clear indication. I'm just going to see if I can find this particular video. Because there's a video on the Book of Abraham that I thought was quite good. I just want to see if I can find it here. Oh yeah, here we go. So we're going to get up James White's video on this, and we're just going to have a listen, and then we can comment then after a certain point. And if you have any parallels you want to draw on, Daniel, throughout this stream, if there's something that it reminds you of in Islam, or any connections you want to make that you feel are edifying, or if there's any Bible verses, just let me know, and we can head to those ones too.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, hold on. Let me just share my screen here. This one.
Fairly recently, called the Joseph Smith Egyptian Papyri by Robert K. Rittner from Signature Books, which I sort of expected to be LDS Signature Books, but it really isn't. It's critical and recognizes the fact that basically Joseph Smith had no earthly idea what he was talking about when he did this. In fact, just to give you a taste of it, on page 265, in the Book of Abraham, Smith provided an explanation for 21 figures, a term he used haphazardly to include both images.
I just want to stop there for a moment, because this is quite important, right? This is the other thing people don't know. If I'm not mistaken, I think the Book of Abraham is found in the Pearl. Is it the Pearl of Great Price? But it's in their canon, right? As scripture. Joseph provides in that, Daniel, his translation methods. Oh, you're muted. Like he provides his translation methods, which is like that opens him up to scrutiny, right? Because now we know his translation methods and we can scrutinize them. Of course, like the Hindi translation that I gave you, right? If I broke down how I got to that, you could then counter me and say, no, it doesn't mean that, because this verb actually means this noun means this, and this preposition means this. So what you said about the dog going to the shop doesn't work because these words don't equal that. Okay, they actually equal this. But this is the one thing that, at least from a modern scholarship perspective, has been very damning for the Mormon case, because, like, as I said, if his translation methods turned out to be true and in line with what came much later, because they weren't capable of doing it at that time, that would have built a case for Mormonism. But the fact that later, when translators were finally able to translate a dead language that they couldn't translate, they then saw that his translation was completely, it was nothing more than a work of charlatanry, But again, that's for them to answer. That's not for us to answer. Anyway, we'll continue. Is there anything you'd like to add before I continue on with the video, Daniel?
Yeah, I'd say it's quite appalling how he got away with that, because even in that time there were people who knew different languages. Archaeological research was still being done, and he could have been fact checked anytime. But some kind of a demonic miracle that he got away.
I know. It's really disturbing, and it's like the strange thing about it is, and this is the kind of thing, and I remember Dawkins talked about this, like Mormonism saddens him in the sense that it's such a later developed religion that people should have known better. It's not like the time of Muhammad, where illiteracy was still very, very high, right? Yeah. So in other words, Muhammad lived in a time when, for example, if you were a really good speaker and you were a really, really charismatic individual, right, you could gain a cult following very easily and convince people quite quickly, right? Because they didn't have the same capacity to fact check things that we do today, or at the time of Joseph. Okay. Like literacy at the time of Joseph in America was way higher than what it was at the time of Muhammad. Okay. So as you pointed out, Daniel, and I think that this is kind of disappointing, and this is what Dawkins pointed out. No one should have been fooled by it, right? Because the guy, they knew also he had a track record of going to trials for being a con man, right? He was trialed for being a con man, for crystal ball gazing, right? So, like, they knew his reputation, and the fact that they still allowed him to convince them enough to build this cult out of his whatever agenda he had is, again, as you pointed out, Daniel, that can be nothing more than demonic, right? Like, that's demonic forces at work, right? In terms of deceiving people to that degree, when we know they would have known better at that time, is disappointing, to say the least. Anyway, is there anything else you'd like to add, Daniel?
No, that would be all. We can dive in.
Okay, we'll continue on with the video.
And text passages. Although it could be argued that his explanations were not intended as translations, Smith did specifically label them as such in his concluding remarks in the explanation of facsimile 2. The above translation is given as far as we have any right to give at the present time, emphasis added. One of the keystones of the modern defense of the Book of Abraham is to try to attack the idea that it's a translation, because it's not. We now have the papyri in our possession, and there is no translation going on here, not in any meaningful use of that word translation, and certainly not as Joseph Smith himself represented it at the very time of this. Since Smith provided a common explanation for numbers 12 to 21, et cetera, then it says, as will be seen, Smith's numbering indicates that he could not recognize the usual order of the text, right to left. So he didn't recognize which way Egyptian was read. Nor could he distinguish text written upside down.
That's another extremely damning point. So, just for those who don't know, right? Older languages, the way, and even today, it still works today with certain modern languages, right? As you know, Daniel, they can be read, some languages have to be read a specific way. So, like Hebrew, if I'm not mistaken, is right to left as opposed to left to right. Chinese, I think, is similar, right? There's a similar, it's read slightly differently than English is, right? Because English is just we read left to right, okay? And when he was translating and he explained his translation, he explained everything the wrong way, right? And that specific language that he translated was translated the opposite way to how he explained it. So it's sort of like, imagine if there was like an ancient Hebraic text, okay? And people no longer knew how to translate it, Daniel. And I was translating it. I was explaining that it's read and it's translated from left to right. And then later on, they discovered, no, these people, they read right to left, and they, that's how you would have translated from right to left, not left to right. It's like that, right? It's a clear indication that the guy didn't know what he was doing, that this was just part of an agenda he had to try and demonstrate, that he was a prophet. Again, as part of him being a con man, right, and furthering his case, right, he has to invent stories that sound authentic. And he was lucky, Daniel, because at the time, no one had access to the papyrus except for him. It wasn't until later that everyone else got their hands on it and they could see what it was that he translated. And then they found out that what he translated was totally bogus to what he said. Anyway, is there anything you want to add, or you want me to plow on?
Yeah, just brings to mind, what Jesus said. He said, there is nothing hidden, and that everything will be brought to light. So, that's kind of what's happening with Islam as well as Mormonism and anything else. In the end, truth must prevail.
Yes. Actually, hold on, I'm just going to quickly check. Oh, yeah, let me pin that to the top. I forgot to pin the comment, pin message. Did it pin? Oh, it did. Okay, I was just double checking. And as you know, Daniel, and I only figured this out recently, we have to, YouTube doesn't allow you to put links in the comments anymore. But if you do it before, you can, apparently, which is really strange. But anyway, that's besides the point. So let's continue on with the video.
And oriented to the inverted scene below them. So he goes the wrong direction. And when the text is inverted to actually refer to an image below it, he doesn't recognize that and has things upside down and backwards is what is found in the Egyptian alphabet and grammar and things like that, and in the facsimiles. Since facsimile 2 contains distortions clearly introduced by Smith, so in other words, as you can sort of see, let me see if I can do this. You can sort of see, yeah, that's a good look at the cover. You can sort of see here, the brown is what we have of the facsimiles, and then you can see what has been added in as it appears in the LDS scriptures. And what has been added in is a distortion. That's there wouldn't be a human head on that. These are scenes from the Egyptian Book of the Dead, Book of Breathings. These are common funerary documents that were buried with individuals to give them guidance and power in the afterlife, and the scenes that they contain have zip to do with Abraham, the time of Abraham, have nothing to do with Abraham. They're not from that time period. They are clearly and plainly in reference to.
And by the way, I just want to point out, Daniel, just so you know, right? He's quoting from Robert Rittner's book, who's an Egyptologist. So just in case people are wondering where he's getting this from. And the thing is, it's not just Robert Rittner. It's John A. Wilson, who's. But I'm just going to give you some names now, just so you can know how bad this is, right, for Mormonism. Yeah. So Robert K. Rittner is an Egyptologist at the University of Chicago. You also have John A. Wilson, who's another Egyptologist at the University of Chicago. And then also at the University of Chicago, another Egyptologist, Daniel Klaus Baer. Mm-hmm. Okay? So all the people that have looked at Joseph's translation who aren't LDS are all in agreement that his translation is a fraud.
Yeah.
Okay? And what's it called? James gave some of the reasons there, okay? One of them being, for example, when he tried to do a reconstruction of the missing papyrus, he actually did it incorrectly. It isn't in like the orientation of things he has backwards, and then on top of that he puts into the image things which were never there in the original image, meaning he didn't know. Mm-hmm. He was just making it up as he went along because he was trying to make it appear a certain way, and that's what people do. Okay, but when you scrutinize what it is that they've done and you stack it up with the real thing, then it becomes apparent whether it's true or not, right? Mm-hmm. And sadly, in his case, when they tested it, it turned out that it was a fraudulent text. But it's quite sad that such a later developed religion, and even today, like they like this, Daniel. Like we went there and we spoke with them. They're convinced that he's a true prophet.
Oh yeah.
It's not like this is not just like when you go to a Mormon temple or whatever, because we went. It's not like they're kind of thinking, we believe the Bible and this Joseph Smith guy is important, but it's not really important. And it all just, no, their perspective is he's the final prophet in some sense. It's quite similar, actually. It's not too dissimilar to Islam, right? Mm-hmm. This is a complicated point to get into, but there's strands of thought within Mormonism by certain Mormon writers, certain Mormon scholars in the past that have kind of tried to deify, in some sense, Joseph Smith in a similar sense to how Muhammad is deified in Islam. But that's a separate thing. Regardless, the thing is they do believe this and they're willing to defend it in the same vein that Muslims are willing to defend Muhammad and the Quran. With Muhammad and the Quran, I could make the argument at least that, as Dawkins does, it has a level of greater authenticity given how old of a source it is. It kind of has that going for it. But what honestly does this have going for it, Daniel?
Nothing.
Yeah. Anyway, is there anything you'd like to add, or we continue on?
No, we can go on.
Okay.
To other items that come from long after the days of Abraham, standard Egyptian funerary documents from around the 1st century. And so there's no issue there whatsoever in what these things actually represent, what they actually are. So couldn't tell whether it was written upside, backwards, whatever. So since facsimile 2 contains distortions clearly induced by Smith, who further added revelatory translation explanation for the artificial insertions. So he messed up when he tried to restore what was missing, and then gave translation of what he messed up. Apologists are caught between reproducing the false but traditional image or defending its flawed content. Given the obvious discrepancy revealed between the Smith and modern interpretations, Rhodes' conclusion is startling from any scholarly perspective. So here's Michael Dennis Rhodes, the Mormons have been struggling for many years now to come up with some way of explaining the fact that once these papyri became available, there had already been criticism as soon as people began to understand, the Mormons left and went to Utah. And man, they were sort of out of sight, out of mind. They had their own little kingdom out there, and they're out in the middle of nowhere. And so they could sort of develop on their own. And that's when polygamy flourishes and all sorts of things like that. But even with that, they still sent missionaries back into more populated areas. And once you get into the later half of the 19th century and Egyptian starts becoming understood, there were a few people who, encountering the LDS scriptures and seeing those images, who knew what they were, are going, that's not what any of that means. All these explanations are completely wrong.
Yeah, so let's stop there. So you kind of get the gist here, the point, right?
Yes.
So at the time that Joseph claimed to have translated this papyrus, that's the type of language, the type of ancient Egyptian that was on it, was a dead language. So there was no way of translating it. That's why he was lucky. He could claim to be a prophet and kind of get away with it because there was no way of testing or verifying what he was doing. But then later, when that language and other Egyptian language became translatable, they then went back, Daniel, and then they were like, "Well, let's see what he translated. Now we can translate it. Let's see what he translated." And then that's when they found out, no, this guy is a fraud. He made this up. This is not, he has not translated this correctly whatsoever. And that's the consistent view within scholarship. Again, I've just given 3 Egyptologists who are all in agreement on this.
Yeah.
And this would be, here's the thing, right? And I ask Mormons to do the same thing that I ask Muslims to do, okay? Provide me with 3 non-LDS credible scholars who agree that Joseph's translation is authentic. And the reason I ask that, Daniel, and you probably know why, right, is because, and I've used this analogy, and we used it a moment ago with the Hindu phrase, how are you, right? In German, right? And I gave this example before, right? Ich habe einen Hund. I have a dog. Okay? I don't need a consensus on that. I know that that's how that phrase is translated. It's a German sentence, and I can break it down, and I can show you my translation methods. And from a scholarly perspective, any translator of the German language would tell you, yes, that sentence is translated that way for X, Y, and Z reasons, okay? So what the syntax tells us, the nouns, the verbs, the prepositions, that's what that sentence means, okay? However, again, if I translated that sentence incorrectly, okay, people are going to pick up that. They're going to pick up on that straight away, right? If I said it actually means that a cat jumped on the roof, okay? Obviously, someone who knows the German language will be able to call me out on that and explain why it is that I'm wrong in my translation, okay? And that's where you have to be honest, because translation is straightforward, Daniel. If his translation was correct, then every other non-LDS person would be agreeing with his translation. Why is it that every single non-LDS person who has viewed those same papyrus all unanimously agree that it's a false translation, it's a mistranslation, and it's fraudulent? Right? You as a Mormon have to address that, okay? You can't sit there and just turn the blinders on and make excuses for Joseph. And I say this, I say this humbly. Daniel and I are not saying this in the same vein to Muslims to just attack you or bash you over the head. We're saying this to really get you to question if what you claim to have as the truth is actually the truth. Because if Joseph is a prophet And this is one of his revelations from God. How is his revelation from God a complete mistranslation?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So God is capable of providing and deceiving people with complete mistranslation. Is that the God of the Bible, Daniel?
No, absolutely not.
So, like, these are things you guys have to ask, and you have to look at the evidence. You can't just sit there and turn the blinders on. And remember, Daniel, when we went into that temple, right? I did it in a very gentle way, right? But I called them out on one thing at the very end of our meeting. What did they say, Daniel? They said something like, "Well, we pray, and the Spirit of God will convict us." And then I
Yeah.
said, "What's my reply always to that, Daniel? Muslims pray and they feel convicted. Okay,
Yeah,
Hindus
exactly.
pray and they feel convicted.
Mhm.
Buddhists pray and they feel convicted, okay, or meditate, whatever you want to call it, okay? The reality of it is just because you're being convicted internally, all right, how do you know that that conviction is in fact from God, okay? Because according to the scriptures, right, you know who can appear like an angel of light, okay?
Yeah.
Meaning he can convict you very convincingly of something which is clearly false into you believing that it's completely true.
Mhm.
He's that effective at his deception, okay? So how do you know? And then again, that's why you have the biblical context of test the spirits, right? And this is what I always try and tell Mormons as well as Muslims, okay? How do you know it's from God and it's, that you're not being deceived here? Well, test it, because if it's a true, authentic translation, we know translation is straightforward and it should stack up with how all the other translators are translating it, because they would all translate in the same way.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's straightforward. Like the sentence, "How are you?" It's straightforward, right? But anyway, that's my side. Is there anything you want to add, Daniel, or do you want me to continue on?
No, I think it's very clear what you explained.
Okay.
The facsimiles have been altered and changed and all the rest of this kind of stuff. What are y'all talking about? And so there had been criticism for a long time, but most of the Mormons were insulated from that, being out in the Intermountain West. It was not until the papyri were found that you now had the evidence from the papyri that went together with the evidence from the facsimiles. And you could have a full testing of Joseph Smith's claims to be able to translate only 5 chapters of the Book of Abraham over against 532 pages of the Book of Mormon. If you can't get 5 chapters, you certainly didn't get the 530 pages right either. And since Smith didn't get a word right, I mean, other than, I guess you could say that, there are certain hieroglyphs that would be taken as containing a definite article and you got the word "the" in. But literally, he would literally take one symbol and end up with 60, 70 English words from a single symbol. He had no earthly idea what he was doing. And, if it was the word "the" and you get "the" in there, that doesn't count as having gotten it right. So what they've done is they've come up, well, no, obviously Joseph Smith wasn't intending this to be seen as a translation. Yes, he was. It's just so silly. This was a mnemonic device to, he just got all this by direct revelation from God, just like his other revelations in the Doctrine and Covenants. And the papyri were just sort of a, cool thing to show people, but really didn't have anything to do with the revelation, none of which would fit. Nobody in the early church believed that. Nobody at that time believed that. That's not what was believed at the time. But since we now can test Joseph Smith, we've got to come up with a way to make it unverifiable one way or the other, so you can maintain belief in Joseph Smith. So with that, you've got Rhodes's, you have the quote here. Rhodes's conclusion is startling from any scholarly perspective. And what did Rhodes say? Quote, "It should come as no surprise to members of the church that as we gain more understanding of Egyptian matters, we find an increasing number of Joseph Smith's explanations of facsimile 2 are in accord with that increased understanding." End quote. That is the voice of very gullible faith that flies in the face.
So that was a quotation from a Mormon trying to back up Joseph's translation. Yeah, sorry, you want to say something, Daniel?
Yeah, I mean, I'm surprised. What are they fighting for? Any
Yeah.
person that has any common sense, when you realize that this guy was, just a fake, he did not get it right, you just have
Yeah.
to leave it. Why do you want to defend something that is not true?
Yeah, I think well, part of it has to do with the fact that, and it's same with Islam, but to a slightly lesser degree, I would argue. I think there's a greater case. When I say this, please, nobody take this out of context. There isn't a case for Islam, but what I'm saying is, in some sense, I could say it's easier to make a case for Islam than it is for Mormonism, just due to the fact that the Quran itself is, a record that is far older, okay, in origin than what the and I think even far more interesting in origin than what the Book of Mormon is. Okay,
Mhm.
now both are not true. Both are corrupt texts from demonic influence or whatever. But yeah, it's really really sad. It's really disturbing that that's what it is, and that people are that gullible to sit there and defend the guy regardless of what the evidence is telling them, because sitting there and just saying that it's a mystery, which is kind of what Rhodes was saying, it's an example. This is what Rhodes' point is, right? It's an example of it's an example of Joseph's increased understanding, right, by this revelation that he was receiving from God, that we have the production of a text that is in some sense unexplainable. Well, again,
Mhm.
that's flowery language, but what you're saying is it can't be explained, and we just have to trust in it because Joseph was a prophet. That's the point in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Okay, but that's no better than the circular Islamic argument, right? We believe it
Mhm.
because the Quran says so. Well, in Mormonism, this is their testimony, Daniel. Just so you know, we believe it because Joseph said so.
Yeah, sorry to hear that. Because
You know?
even I mean, there is already a warning, as you previously mentioned, right? That the First of all, Jesus warned the elect that it is
Yeah,
possible that the elect can be deceived, so he told them to stay on guard. Paul
yeah,
told us to examine ourselves, whether we be in the faith. Then he also explained that the Satan can come as an angel of light and try to deceive people. So
yeah,
having all these warnings beforehand, again Peter says that we need to give heed to the word of God as a light that is shining, and it is the only sure word of prophecy. And again Paul goes on to say, we are an angel that comes and announces anything different, let him be accursed. So
yeah,
having had all these warnings, it's very surprising to me that these people still continue to believe something that is not consistent with
yeah,
the New Testament. That's one side of the coin. The other side is that, as you are pointing out now, it is very clear that he didn't get these things right.
yeah,
So either he himself was deceived or he was deceiving. But in any
yeah,
case, now we can examine and see that is not true.
yeah,
So again, we have to ask a Mormon, why are you still a Mormon? There is no basis for continuing in this faith.
yeah. I think that's a good point, and I hope that any Mormon watching would be willing to come on and explain it to us,
Mhm.
because we're trying to understand why you're going along with this, because the evidence doesn't bode well for it. Um, and I argue this as well, like even within scholarship, like the Bible's not laughed at within scholarship. It's a highly regarded text within scholarship, Daniel, because it's regarded as a genuine ancient record.
Mhm.
Okay, that's the scholarly view on the Bible. Okay, the scholarly view on the Book of Mormon is that the Book of Mormon is a joke,
Yeah.
right? That's what you're trying to defend. Now, the scholarly view for the Book of Mormon isn't just scholars sitting there, Daniel, trying to bash these people for the sake of bashing them. It's not that. These people are evidence driven, okay? If they
Mhm.
had sufficient reason to believe the Book of Mormon was an ancient record as it claims to be, they'd sit there and they'd be touting that. So
Yeah.
historians would be saying, yes, yes, it's an ancient record, because even though it was found much later at the time of Joseph, we can authenticate it as an ancient record because it lines up with X, Y, and Z.
Mhm.
Okay, but the thing is, it lines up with nothing. Like
Right.
that's the point. The only thing it lines up with is Joseph's consistent character of being a con man,
Mhm.
right? And that's the disturbing aspect of it. And that's why, for example, Dawkins will sit there and say, "One, Dawkins will say that as far as the Book of Mormon is concerned, you're talking about a 19th century text written
Mhm.
in 16th early 17th century, early modern English, which was obsolete by the time of Joseph.
Yeah,
That's
nobody
not how
talks like
people
that.
talked during that time. It's not how they spoke.
Yeah, that's true.
Like, Daniel, if I sent you in a time machine back into the 19th century at the time of Joseph, someone isn't going to come up to you, Daniel, and say something. They wouldn't say to you, "Pray tarry, Daniel. Verily, I must tell thee that." They're not going to speak to you like that.
Yeah.
You know, but like the fact that that's the vernacular of the Book of Mormon is a clear indication that it's a fraud, because we have what authors were writing during that time and how they wrote. They were writing in the same modern English that we write today.
Yeah.
Okay, exactly the same. And the fact that he's maintaining, and I've argued this before, and I think this is the argument. I think the reason he wrote purposely, and by the way, he tries to mimic early modern English, and he gets it wrong in places, but that's a separate argument, which is a further demonstration that it's a false text. But the reality of it is, right, is that particular vernacular, as I said, Daniel, it was obsolete at the time of Joseph. And the reason he wrote in that was for one purpose and one purpose alone, I believe, which is he knew that the King James vernacular was very popular among churchgoers at his time. And his line of thinking is what, Daniel? If I maintain that vernacular, my text will appear more authentic than if I just wrote in modern English. And I think that was the line of thinking behind it. I could be wrong, but I think you might agree with me on some level that that is a good hypothesis as to why he might have forced that particular writing style at a time where it was no longer in use.
Yeah, of course. Because God didn't speak like that, right? It's not a divine vernacular, but he apparently felt that may resonate with most people, and
Yeah.
he just chose that.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly the argument, because biblically speaking, and I made this argument as well, whenever God in the Bible speaks to people, he speaks to them, Daniel, in their language. And that's the amazing thing about it. So for example, I think it's in it's escaping me now. Not Malachi. I don't know why I can't think of it. It's the verse where it says, if your God did not create the heavens and the earth, if your gods did not create the heavens and the earth, he shall perish from beneath the heavens and the earth. Which book is that? It's not coming to me.
Not sure.
Hold on. It's chapter 10 of the book. I just can't remember the name of the book. Create the heavens and the earth. Jeremiah chapter 10. My apologies. So it's Jeremiah chapter 10. But in that context, when God speaks to the people, right, there's a switch from Hebrew to Aramaic, because the people that are being addressed speak Aramaic. It's like, and this isn't just the only example of that, okay? Like if he was seriously receiving revelation from God, why is God going to show up and then magically start speaking Shakespearean English? It doesn't make any sense. Again, it's a further reason as to why it's kind of joked about, within scholarship. Is there anything you want to add, Daniel, or will I continue on? Okay.
Case of the facts as they exist, but that's what they have to do, because the Book of Abraham is one of the, absent having golden plates to look at, the Book of Abraham is as close as we're going to get to any kind of test of Joseph Smith's translating abilities, which were his claim to be able to translate those languages was central to his claim of authority. Absolutely central to his claim of authority. And it's not like the Book of Abraham is the central doctrinal teaching of the Mormon Church. But if you did take the time to look at the tract that I mentioned on the last program, Min is Not God, you may have seen the images that were included in that. I actually haven't looked at it for a while to see here, and I didn't bring this up. Let me see if I can grab it real quick. And it's loading, and there it is. And this is the facsimile. So you have that there. This is the facsimile number 2. I guess I need to, well, I thought I had, oh, it is. As it appears right here in the LDS scriptures, even today. And you will notice the explanation that is provided. Kolob, signifying the first creation, nearest to the celestial or the residence of God, first in government, the last pertaining to the measurement of time. The measurement according to celestial time, which celestial time signifies 1 day to a cubit. Yeah, figure that one out. 1 day in Kolob is equal to 1,000 years according to the measurement of this earth, which is called by the Egyptians Ja-oh-eh. Sounds Klingon to me, but we'll move on from there. Stands then, figure 2 stands next. So what was figure 1? Here's figure 2 right here. Here's figure 3. There's 4. There's figure 1. So there's Kolob. Now, is that Kolob in Egyptian lore or magic? I think no, of course not. These are each identifiable gods in identifiable situations, doing certain things that are specifically allowing a person to have passage through the realm of the dead. There's no or anything else in any of this material whatsoever. Figure 2 stands next to Kolob, called by the Egyptians Oliblish, which is the next grand governing creation near to the celestial or the place where God resides. You got to understand that according to the book of Abraham, God lives on a planet that circles a star named Kolob. And so this is why this is important.
I'm actually going to stop there. What do you think of that, Daniel?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what to make of it because like it is not Bible related, right? So I'm kind of wondering, why is this coming into the picture for Joseph Smith?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that where he's getting this narrative from about God seated upon his throne on a separate planet. And what did he say? Which orbits around a star called Kolob or something like that?
Yeah.
Like, where on earth you're getting that from? I mean, yeah, there's no biblical context for it. There's no biblical grounding for it. So it's clearly a product of his imagination. Now we're going to see later what these figures actually mean. Okay, on the proprius. I think I told you in the past. One of them is some god called Min, which is a fertility god. But Joseph claims that is Adonai seated upon his throne.
Okay.
So, but that's the translation he comes up with, right? But anyway, is there anything you want to add, or will you continue on?
No, we'll just continue.
Okay.
Important. And so you go through this, and eventually you get down to what we focused upon in our tract, which is figure 7. Figure 7 represents God sitting upon his throne, revealing to the heavens the grand keywords of the priesthood, as also the sign of the Holy Ghost unto Abraham in the form of a dove. Now, what is that? Well, figure 7, I get it centered up here, is right here. It's upside down from our perspective. This is supposed to be God sitting upon his throne, revealing through the heavens the grand keywords of the priesthood. And this is the Holy Spirit approaching in the form of a sign of a dove. Now, when you actually know something about Egyptology, you know that this is all incredibly idolatrous material, and that the God represented there is actually a sexually aroused male deity named Min.
Yeah, so that's what I was saying, right? That's the true translation of that. And Joseph translates it as what? As the Almighty God, right? That this is Yahweh seated upon his throne, but it's actually a sexual, what would you call it? A fertility god, right? Whose whole kind of similar to the Hindu thing, right? Remember we looked. You mentioned these Hindu gods who chase after women, right? In this like kind of lust way.
Yeah.
Same in this context. Exact same type of god. And Joseph is correlating that with the Most High God from the Bible. Right. So imagine if someone took one of those Hindu gods. Those, I remember we went through one of the stories where they were chasing after a woman or something, and then they said that was Yahweh. Well, like, you see the problem. But yeah, is there anything you'd like to add, or will I continue on?
Yeah, I mean, from this information, it's very difficult for me to have any connection to the biblical faith, because he's appealing to an Egyptian god. It was a very common theme, Hinduism as well, and most of the religions, Greeks as well. They had these gods of fertility, god of rain, and all that. And like especially in when Jesus was standing over what is called the gates of hell, and he was talking about that the gates of Hades shall not prevail against the church. So that god that was being worshipped there, that's also a similar god apparently. They used to sacrifice, I think, he goat and she goat, something like that. So it was all related to that similar concept, god of sex and all that. So why would he when the Bible is very clear, right? God challenges again and again, especially in Isaiah. He separates himself and distinguishes that there is no other god apart from him. He has declared everything from the beginning, and challenges, is there any other god to present themselves? So having known those things, again associating with a particular Egyptian god, I think that is heresy or condemnable action. And especially the narrative through Moses in Exodus is very clear, right? God challenges and defeats and exposes the false gods that are in Egypt, that they are not on par with the true God, who is the maker of heaven and earth. But for this guy again to go back here, try to bring something, try to make some connection, that's a sure sign that this is a heretical religion when compared to the Abrahamic religion. The problem again here, do not claim continuity with the biblical faith, just like Islam. If you do, then you will be proven as a false prophet.
Yeah, and I brought up this psalm in particular. This is Psalm 96:5. This is God, right? This is God speaking. For all the gods of the peoples are worthless idols, but the Lord made the heavens. So every other god, that these nations, all of mankind claims to be a god other than the one true God, are idols.
Yeah.
Okay. What that means is they're a figment of their imagination. Okay. They've created them. These are created gods. They don't actually exist. They're just nothing more than an idol. The one true God is the only God that exists. And another example of that, we're going to go there because I love this verse. This was the verse I brought up to the Mormons when we went and met them. Is Isaiah 43:10. Because again, in a similar fashion, it says the same thing, but even I would say even more strongly than this. So this is where. So just for those who don't know, this is Isaiah 43:10. But let's just quickly go through it. I'm going to share it here. Share this tab instead. So what does it say? You are my witnesses, declares the Lord, and my servant whom I have chosen, that you may know and believe me and understand that I am He. Before me there was no God formed, neither shall there be after me. And then it goes on to say, I am the first and the last. Besides me, there are no other Elohims. There are no other gods. Okay. Psalm 96:5 says the same thing. They're just idols. All those other so-called gods, or at least these things which have the title of God being applied to them, are just nothing more than a figment of people's imaginations that they have created. But the creator, the sovereign Lord over the universe, is the one true God and the only true God within creation. Everything else is just an idol, and shouldn't be ascribed in any sense, the level of worthiness, the level of worship and the level of honor that is supposed to be given to the one true God above everything else.
Amen. Yeah.
But then you have Joseph coming along and then, claiming the stuff that he's claiming. also talking about, this infinite progression and regression things, which is that, there was millions and millions and millions of gods. But the issue here is, one, it contradicts scripture. It contradicts the core message of the Old Testament, which is that there's only one God. And then it also contradicts the core teachings of both rabbinic Judaism as well as Christianity, historically speaking. Because in the early church, you would have to produce, as a Mormon, evidence of church fathers, prominent church fathers believing that there's more than one God and clearly outlining that in their works. None of them do. From their perspective, there's only one God. Okay.
Yeah.
And by the way, the one outlier example that they like to go to, Justin Martyr, doesn't support their case, because when he speaks of Jesus, he uses the word heteros. Okay. Instead of they try and frame it as him using the Greek word doulios, which is second God, right? Doulios Deus. But he says heteros Deus, which means he's the same. It's the same God, right? Because heteros means same, right?
Yeah.
Same, right? That's where we get the word, for the heterousia phrase, right? Which is same substance. Okay.
You mean homoousia?
Sorry, homoousia. But hetero has the same meaning, which is same or like, right? Versus doulios, which is second. So the point here being that Justin Martyr wasn't saying that Jesus is a second God. He's saying that it's the same God in the sense of by nature or essence, but as person, as the second person of the Trinity, right? That's the argument, okay? Where we don't claim that they're three separate beings. We claim that they're three distinct persons, but one being by substance or nature. And that's the Trinitarian position. And that's what Justin isn't deviating from that by calling Jesus, a heteros Deus, right? A same God in the sense of the same that the Father is, right? Because it's the same nature, same divine essence, whatever you want to call it. But that doesn't support the what's called the Mormon argument. Okay, let's go back to is there anything you want to add, Daniel?
No, I think we can go on.
Share this tab. Yep.
And that's the widget. What widget I? What did I forget what it was, but I'm sorry. Yeah, it was anyway. Being presented has nothing to do with the Holy Spirit. Has nothing to do with priesthoods. Well, I suppose Egyptian priesthoods, pagan priesthoods, but nothing to do with what was connected to the text of the Book of Abraham. And just quoting Mormons trying to explain this stands as its own self-refutation. I mean, to anyone who wants to critically examine things. And here's the point I want to make. There is nothing that corresponds to this kind of thing in biblical Christianity. Nothing. In other words, what I'm saying is, I know I've pretty much encountered the toughest questions and arguments about from source criticism and form criticism and alleged contradictions and world religions theories and borrowing from this and borrowing from that, all the rest of that kind of stuff. There is nothing in the Christian faith where we have to deal with something like this.
Yeah.
Where you have where when you take the claims of Joseph Smith in their normal language and as how they were understood by everyone around them, and when you analyze that.
Yeah, I like what he's saying there, because in some of the ancient biblical stories, like the Old Testament, for example, like the story of Adam and Eve, some scholars, Daniel, did try to hypothesize an origin for that story outside of the Bible based on some ancient drawings that seem to narrate a similar story. But ultimately, the rabbit hole, right, that they try and go down, where they try and create this hypothesis, and a lot of the time it's just because they want to disprove Scripture. They don't want it to have any credence at all, so they want to find a way to kind of prove with certainty that it's not, it's not divinely inspired,
Yeah.
that it's just drawing from these other traditions and sources. Ultimately, that argument got it got nowhere within scholarship. It's sort of like the one or two very, very extreme outliers who believe Jesus was a myth. I don't know if you know this, but there actually are one or two credible scholars who have held to this hypothesis that Jesus is a mythological figure,
Mm-hmm.
that he never actually existed. He was an invention by a certain group of followers during a specific time that wanted to kind of further their cause, let's just say. But all these arguments, they come and go because when they're scrutinized and they're criticized, they don't stack up with the evidence that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, the Adam and Eve one, ultimately in the end they recognize, okay, no, fair enough. The Adam and Eve one is unique, meaning it has a source that isn't from the source that we thought it was from. They'll say we can't pinpoint what that source is, but we know for a fact it isn't what we were trying to claim it was from.
Mm-hmm.
As in, they were saying, it may have originated outside in other traditions.
Yeah.
Kind of ancient traditions or whatever. But when the Bible is scrutinized in that way, it ultimately holds true. However, in this case, when you have the Book of Mormon being scrutinized in that way, it's like, well, it becomes quite apparent very quickly the kind of origin that we're talking about here, that this isn't an ancient record. This is nothing more than, the work of a con man, right?
Yeah, makes sense.
Sadly, I say that sadly because I just wish more Mormons would actually look at the evidence as opposed to just believing for the sake of believing, because it's more convenient to do that than to actually challenge your belief system, right? Because it's comfortable to stay in a lane that you've become accustomed to. Yeah, even if that lane, I think on some level, some of the people who stay in that lane, the Mormon lane, I think they are aware that there's certain things that are kind of a little bit like, okay, this may not be exactly true, but if I start questioning things, then it's going to cause me to leave, and I'd rather stay here than go into kind of uncharted territory. It's sort of like, in some sense, it's sort of like, maybe not to the same degree, but maybe you might get the analogy with the Israelites out in the wilderness, right? What ends up happening, even though God is the truth and He's leading them, they actually want to go back to captivity and slavery because it was more comfortable for them. They become so accustomed to that lifestyle that when they were brought into uncertainty, even though this was ultimately leading them to the truth, right? They wanted to go back to what they were familiar with, right? Because there was a sense of comfort there. And I think psychologically that can happen in religions. It certainly happens in Islam. There's no doubt about it. A lot of people don't want to leave Islam because it's convenient to stay. Or in certain cases, you're kind of, what's the word for it? You're aggressively, I don't want to say threatened, but you're aggressively coerced into staying, within Islam, because if you don't, the consequences can be so severe. That's the deterrence right there. It's like, if I leave there, there's going to be consequences. In Mormonism, it's not as much that there'll be consequences, but more so that you might lose a lot of people that you've grown up around, that have become really good friends of yours. I don't think they're as severe as, let's say, the JWs. JWs, you lose everybody. They'll just cut contact with you. Mormons, I don't think it's as severe, but there's still sort of a sense of, you're not one of us anymore.
Yeah, of course.
Which is sad. I don't think that's how we should treat people. At the end of the day, we should push people towards the truth always, but regardless of their position, we should desire to have communion with people and try and convince them of the truth. Okay, actively work towards finding a way for God to present Himself to that person in a way that can, that brings them to the truth. That doesn't mean we give credence to their lies, or what they believe in. We're not doing that, but we're trying to ultimately edge them towards the truth, and not giving up on someone, I think, is important, regardless of how far they may have strayed, right? Because at the end of the day, I mean, this is the whole idea of the one sheep that goes astray. It's like, the 99 are safe, right? But the shepherd goes after the one, right? That's how important that one is. That even if it's gonna, throw itself or hurl itself over to the cliff, he's going to go to the point of death for that person, and that's how he's the good shepherd, right? As it says in John 10, right? The good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. Okay, That's the extent to which he goes for his sheep, and that's why you can trust in someone like that. And in this case, that person is gone. But yeah, so is there anything you want to add, or we continue on here?
No, actually, I'm learning a lot. We can continue.
Okay.
You discover very, very clearly that Joseph Smith had no idea what he was doing or what he was saying when it came to being a translator. That was obvious. Even his comments on other things, biblical translation, illustrated that as well. But the fact is that this was central to his claim as prophet, revelator, and seer. And yet to see entire books written today trying to gloss these things over and say, well, this is, revelation is a tricky thing. It's very subjective. Here's the problem. If Mormonism keeps going this direction, once you spiritualize the Book of Abraham, you've got no way of avoiding spiritualizing the Book of Mormon. That's already happening because we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that the Olmecs and Mayans and Aztecs and all the rest of them had nothing to do with the Book of Mormon story. That the Book of Mormon story of horses and chariots and bows and arrows and steel swords and all the rest of that stuff didn't exist on this continent. That's a fact. And so they've already had to shrink the Book of Mormon area down to a teeny tiny little spot so that no one would ever be able to find it. So there wouldn't be any material remains of this entire civilization. Even though, I'm reading Bushman's biography of Joseph Smith right now. He tells the story of Zelph, the white Lamanite. He didn't duck it. I mean, he's spinning it. But he tells the story of Zelph, the white Lamanite, where Joseph Smith, after the publication of the Book of Mormon, traveling with some of the brethren, they come across a burial mound, which were quite common, given the presence of the native populations at the time. And they dug down, found a corpse. There was allegedly an arrow through its ribs. And by revelation, Joseph explained that this was Zelph, the white Lamanite. Now, this is way out in the east. What that means clearly is that Joseph Smith believed the Book of Mormon story took place over a vast area, extending all the way into upstate New York. I mean, Moroni is the one that hides the plates there. And so to try to say, well, it probably happened in a couple square miles somewhere down Mesoamerica, and given the conditions there, we wouldn't expect to be able to find any material remains, blah, blah, blah. That's Mormonism's utter retreat. And once you spiritualize the Book of Abraham.
Yeah, I just want to add something there. Like, that's a really good point, right? Is what they try and do with the Book of Mormon, Daniel, because the Book of Mormon is set in America, just so you know.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. Like the whole history that's relayed there is set in America. It's about, God's presence going over to America and then God making himself known there, right? It's another testament of Jesus, right? So Jesus actually goes to the Americas, right? And kind of, what would you call it? Allegedly, according to the book, he evangelizes there to the people. But putting that aside for a moment, the problem then becomes when it starts talking about these ancient civilizations and cultures, which were already there in America, right? Going back to the BC period, where's the evidence for these civilizations? See, we know, right? We have evidence of the biblical characters. Like, I'll give you one example, okay? There's a tablet that was found. I don't know if you're aware of this, Daniel. There's a tablet that's found that talks about King David.
Okay.
And this tablet dates back to around 1000 BC. Okay. It's there's a very short inscription on it, but it talks about the house of David. And it goes back to around 1000 BC. So the kingdom of David and the character of David is agreed within scholarship to be a historical figure because there's archaeological evidence outside of the Bible which proves that David existed in some shape or form. And as as a king-like figure, okay, over a specific group of people, okay. Now, obviously, that's the biblical context is that's the Israelites, right? That was the tribes, okay, that he was the king over, allegedly, right? He was the king of Israel, apparently, okay, alongside the other kings, okay. But the idea here is that from a biblical context, there is archaeological evidence outside of it which demonstrates that these stories have a historical grounding, okay, that they're not just mere fabrications. Joseph
absolutely.
then in the Book of Mormon gives very, very specific locations. He gives very, very specific materials. Like there's even a coin that he talks about, Daniel. Okay, there's a coin that he talks about. It's called alumna. Okay, there's never been alumna has never been found, Daniel. If you're talking about currency, right? As you know, Daniel, coins are one of the longest lasting elements that we have that have been preserved throughout history. We have coins that go back to the BC period.
Yeah.
Well, the reason we know, like this, I'll just give one example of what I'm talking about here so people get it. I think it's Alexander the Great, right? If I'm not mistaken, he was a 3rd century ruler, okay? And I think I told you this before. It was believed for quite some time that he may not have existed, that he might have been just a mythological figure. The reason they came to an agreement that he existed, Daniel, was because they found coins that go back to the 3rd century BC with his inscription on it, with his insignia on it. His face was on it. So then they realized, okay, no, this is a true figure, because they were actually, because that was a common practice back then. Whoever the king was, he would end up on the coin as the inscription.
Yeah.
So if it was Caesar, it was Caesar. Nero, whoever it was. That's the point. Then you have the Book of Mormon, which talks about a specific currency called the lumna, and we can't find no evidence for it. Okay. When it talks about specific materials, specific types of swords, bows, horses, chariots, at this time period, which they didn't exist, by the way, that's the scholarly position from an archaeological standpoint. And if you want to demonstrate otherwise, provide us with non-LDS historians that agree. Because here's the thing, Daniel, there's non-Christian historians and scholars and Egyptologists that agree with the historical context of some of the biblical stories in the Old Testament, and they'll say, yeah, these things would have happened in some shape or form in line with what the Bible is talking about, because we have archaeological evidence that demonstrates this. But when it comes to the Book of Mormon, then they're like, well, that evidence doesn't exist, so we've no reason to believe any of this. I'll stop there. Is there anything you want to add, Daniel?
Yeah, not much actually. You covered a lot. The historical basis through archaeology, how we know whether people existed or not. And Bible has been, confirmed again and again in many different ways, like even the chariots in the Dead Sea and things like that. Yeah, and that's a very good point. Yeah, but Mormonism doesn't have that support.
Yeah, I remember in a particular video, someone asked me. They were like, "Can you provide evidence for a flood at the time of Noah?" And the point that they were trying to get to is like, where's the scholarly consensus on that, right? Because if you're led by scholarly consensus, then if you apply it to that, you'll see very quickly that in some cases, right, you can't authenticate certain things, right? That it is sort of, there is an element of belief there, okay? But here's the thing: if we take Noah, okay, as a figure, as a historical figure, and we talk about a universal flood, yeah, there is agreement within geology, for example, that there was a universal flood around 11,600 BC. Okay, that's why, by the way, for example, you have all these flood myths, not just the biblical account, but you also have, for example, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and then you have another one that appears in China, and they all appear around the same time. In totally different parts of the world, Daniel, you have an emergence of these flood narratives about a universal flood that took place. Okay, it's not like that's a coincidence. That means this was something that universally was experienced at that specific time, and then you have all these people writing about it around the world. What happened? Okay, so that's why, like, if you're asking me about the possibility of a flood at the time of Noah, yeah, there's evidence for it. Okay, because there were accounts that emerged all around the same time period at different parts in the world, and this wasn't during the time of or the age of the internet today, like as today, where we can have instant communication with each other. These people had no communication with each other. If
Right.
you're living, if you're living in Ireland and someone's living in China around 11,000 BC, guess what? You're never going to ever have contact with that person under any circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
They're too far away.
Yeah.
You've no way of getting there, apart from, okay, you could say get there by boat, but how long would that take, Daniel, if I take a boat from Ireland to China?
Yeah. Long time.
A long time, right?
Yeah.
And the reality of it is you're not going to make it, okay? Because if I try and take a boat, it doesn't matter how much resources I put on that boat, okay? How on earth am I going to survive for that long to make sure I get there on time?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, let's continue on with the video.
And these were just things that Joseph Smith experienced, and seeing these pagan papyri made him think of Abraham. Next steps, do it with all of the Book of Mormon. And all you got to do is look what's happened to what used to be called the RLDS Church, which became the Community of Christ.
Okay. So yeah, that was the end of the video. I don't really need to go beyond that, because James explained it quite well.
Mm-hmm.
I think anyway. Like at the end of the day, this is what the Book of Abraham is. Okay, it's what Joseph claimed to be an authentic translation. He provides, and I think it's the Pearl of Great Price. He provides his translation methods, which is the biggest error he made, right? Because now we can scrutinize his methods and see if he translated things correctly.
Yeah.
And then we find at every turn he got it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If there, as James pointed out, if he got one thing correct, that was also accompanied by about 200 things which were wrong. So that's just nothing more than a guess at that point,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah. There's a saying just on that, Adam. Broken clock is right 2 times a day.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's exactly the point. There's also a phrase which is like, if you throw enough mud at the wall, eventually something will stick.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of like, if you have 200 guesses, then the likelihood of one being right, every guess that you make, there's an additional chance or probability that at least one will be correct.
Yeah.
But obviously this isn't good for the context of someone claiming to be a prophet, right? Because he should be correct in everything that he's saying if he's claiming this is divine revelation, right? Because how is God getting 199 things wrong?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And you're just going to sit there and say that that's okay, which as a Mormon, that's what they're doing, right? They're not, sadly, they're not testing it to the point of asking themselves the question, why is it that scholars are consistent here that this is a fraudulent text? Okay. Mm-hmm. All the non-LDS scholars are in agreement. There's no, this is my challenge to Mormons. I mean, I would love for you guys to come on and do this, right? This is my challenge. Provide us with non-LDS scholars who agree the Book of Abraham is an authentic translation.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't, ask yourself why. Okay. And this argument, by the way, Daniel, one of the arguments they'll present is that, most scholars today, they don't really care about the Book of Abraham. That's why they haven't even bothered to address it. Well, no, scholars have looked at the Book of Abraham. I just gave like Robert Rittner is one. Okay. Klaus Baer is another one. Okay. You also have John A. Wilson, which is another one. There's another guy as well called Archibald H. I think it's Sayce. I don't know how he pronounces his second name, but again, another Egyptologist who's also in agreement it's a fraudulent translation. Okay. This is the agreement. Like, why have all these objective sources which have looked at the Book of Abraham all agreed that it's a false translation? Because translation, as I said, it's straightforward.
Right.
If it was authentic and true, they'd all be coming to the same agreement. Yeah, he translated it right, and then they'd be saying, how did he do that? Since it was a dead language, that would be the miracle, right? But it's similar to Muhammad. Whenever this guy has a chance to produce something miraculous, what does he end up doing? He produces something that demonstrates quite clearly that this is not from God, okay? That this is nothing more than a deceptive character at work, in the same vein that Muhammad was a deceptive character during his time, okay? Now, Muhammad had an advantage because he was preying on illiteracy, okay?
Yeah.
Joseph wasn't preying on necessarily on illiteracy. He was preying on gullibility, which is equally as sad because, as we pointed out, and as Dawkins pointed out, these people knew better.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they knew better to be agreeing that what Joseph had produced was true and authentic. But yeah, this is our challenge, Mormons. Please come on and discuss. Okay, actually come on and try and give us a case for this, because there's no point, in sitting there and just believing in something for the sake of believing it, unless you have sufficient reason to do so. Like Daniel and I don't have to defend the Bible as an ancient record. It's a known fact. It's accepted within scholarship. It's an authentic ancient record. We don't have to make a case for it. Okay, it's accepted universally as ancient historical record. You guys have to prove that for your sources. And if you have to prove that for your sources and the evidence doesn't bode well for it, to the point that, as I said, it's joked about within scholarship, what does that tell you? Again, I'm not saying this for the sake of offending Mormons or whatever, but this is what the scholarship says. This is the hardline facts that we have today. This is what they tell us. Daniel and I aren't coming out with this for the sake of bashing Muslims or bashing Mormons. We're just telling you what the data says. And if that's what the data says, then you guys have to, in some sense, address it then. Give us a reason as to why you're going to go along with something if all the evidence indicates it's not true. Again, same claim I make to Muslims. But what do Muslims say? Well, we believe it because the Quran says so.
Yeah.
The Mormon perspective seems to be we believe it because Joseph Smith said so. So yeah. Is there anything you'd like to add, Daniel?
No, I think you made a good case, and we'll be happy to engage any Mormons, any Mormon listening to this. If you want to also set up any discussion in the future, please leave a comment on Adam's channel, and we'll meet up with you.
Yeah, I think we covered the topic today. I think we can leave it there. But as Daniel said, leave a comment, okay? Anyone watching, okay? And we'd be happy to reach out and set up a discussion. We can do it. Daniel and I, we do it every Saturday, okay, pretty much. And then we'll do it on, whenever Daniel's doing it on his channel as well, the Jesus Conversation. He does streams as well. This is a weekly thing, right? So you have weekly opportunities to come on and have these discussions with us, and we'd be happy to have these discussions with you, because we are trying to understand. But again, this is also part of our commitment to the gospel and sharing the gospel, is that we're willing to take the time necessary, right, to go through everything that needs to be gone through with whoever needs to have that conversation, so we can share with them what we believe to be the truth, which is the gospel. Which is what Jesus preached, that's what we're ultimately pointing you to. We're pointing you to the one true God who has eternally existed as Father, Son, and Spirit, and who came to this earth in human form, by the way, to redeem mankind from their sins through him sacrificing himself through his perfect obedience, which sanctifies the flesh, and then offers each and every person who has total faith and belief in him to have a resurrection in the same way that he had a resurrection, and be glorified in the same way, so that they may be in the kingdom with him and his Father forever, okay? That's what we're ultimately preaching for each and every person, because that's what God wants for each and every person. The whole idea of, and I'll end with this, by the way. There's the story of the coins, right? When the Pharisees, I think it's the Pharisees and the scribes, they come to Jesus and they try and trick him about who they should pay tax to. It's in Matthew. I think it's also in Mark, but it's in Matthew as well. And Jesus takes a coin and he says to them, whose inscription is on this? Whose insignia is on this? And they say, Caesar. And then Jesus says, well, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar, and unto God that which is God's. And I think the point there, and I like this interpretation. This was an interpretation that Augustine of Hippo gave on this. His belief was that just like the coin has the inscription of the emperor, okay, us as humans, we bear the image of God, okay? That's our inscription, okay? And a coin has value or worth. So God values us because we have his inscription upon us. Therefore, what's owed to God are his image bearers, the thing which bear his image, because those are the things which in his eyes have importance. Just like in the Roman Empire, the coin had the insignia of the emperor, and then that was the tax that was what was owed to the emperor. What's owed to God are his image bearers. Augustine made that point. I'm not saying you have to agree with that interpretation, but I thought that was quite a beautiful, kind of elegant way of trying to explain what Jesus was getting at there. if that's what he was getting at. But yes, I do believe that, you know, since we are made in man's image, or since we're made in God's image, the idea is that God made us for the purpose of having communion with him, not separation from him. And the fullest realization of that was his willingness to go to the point of death to redeem a people who, by the way, didn't deserve redemption at that point. Okay,
Yeah.
they had forcefully and willingly made the decision to separate themselves from God, right? But in spite of their rejection and forced separation from God, what do the scriptures say? Nothing can separate you from the love of God, right? And that love that God carried for his people was to the point of his own self-sacrifice to ensure that they may have redemption regardless of the course that they had taken. You know, God offers them salvation nonetheless. And that's what I pray for each and every person watching the stream, in Jesus' name.
Amen.
So is there any closing words, Daniel, before we wrap this one up?
That's it. I agree with you, and I really wish and pray that everybody will heed that advice, and call out to God, who is the true God, and He will reveal Himself to you.
Yep. Amen. Okay, everyone. Until next week, whenever we do the next stream, I don't know if Daniel, if you have something planned for Friday or whatever, but you'll let us know, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Okay. God bless everyone. Let me just end this and stream.